Mark Hunt. This story low-key had me in tears when writing the script. Mark Hunt was born on March 23, 1974, in New Zealand, into a big Samoan family. Growing up in a rough neighborhood, he was caught in a cycle of violence and poverty. His father was abusive. Mark and his siblings were beaten so badly they'd sometimes miss school for weeks. In his book, he shares how he was tied up and whipped until his skin was ripped from his back. He was regularly hit with belts, broomsticks, even metal rods. And as bad as it was for him, he said his sister had it far worse. He explained that his sister would get punished for things like talking back, not cleaning fast enough, or just being around when their dad was in a bad mood. Sometimes she'd get locked in a room for days and beaten so badly she couldn't even walk afterward. Mark also said he would go into her room every single night and sexually abuse her, and if she refused, he would take his anger out on her brothers. And as the oldest, she felt like it was her duty to protect her siblings, even if it meant carrying that pain alone. Mark says he still feels uneasy whenever he smells cleaning products because of all the trauma tied to them. With all that rage and pain bottled up, street fights became his way to let it out. He quickly got a name in his city for his knockout power, dropping grown men like it was nothing. But one late night, everything changed. Mark got into a fight outside a nightclub and knocked out several guys. One of the bouncers watching was so impressed by his raw power that he pulled Mark aside and invited him to train at his gym. That one invite kicked off his journey from a street fighter to a professional fighter. Once in the gym, Mark found real discipline. He started with Muay Thai, then moved into professional kickboxing. By 2001, he won the K1 World Grand Prix, knocking out big names and proving his raw talent could go global. In 2004, he made the jump to MMA, signing with Pride in Japan. He pulled off some big wins, including one against the legendary Vanderlei Silva. By 2010, he was in the UFC going toe-to-toe with legends like Stipe, Frank Mir, and Roy Nelson, racking up multiple knockout of the night and fight of the night bonuses along the way. This story isn't just motivational, it's proof that martial arts can be a lifeline, especially for men. In a world where guys are supposed to be tough and not show any emotions, the gym becomes their therapy. It's not just about throwing punches, it's a way of healing. That was a little corny, but you get the point. Francis Ngannou. Francis grew up in a small village in Cameroon, and life there wasn't easy. His parents didn't have money, and they split up when he was still a little kid. By the time he was 10, Francis was working in sand mines. No machines, just him with a shovel and a bucket, digging all day under the sun. That was normal where he lived. Kids had to work just to help their families eat. He always dreamed of something bigger. His parents would get mad and told him to be realistic, but Francis didn't care. At 22, he discovered boxing, but that didn't last long. He got sick and had to stop training. It felt like he was stuck in a box. That's when he made a crazy decision and left for Europe to chase a better life. But this wasn't some easy plane ride. With no money and no passport, Francis was crammed into a tight car with a group of strangers. The car kept breaking down every few miles, and when it did, they had to walk for days under the blazing sun. Francis said he went days without food or water and even had to drink his own sweat just to survive. Most people in his group didn't make it. Some collapsed from hunger and others from heat. Eventually, he made it to Morocco, and all that stood between him and Europe was the border into Spain. But the border between Morocco and Spain is one of the most guarded borders in the world. He said it took him 6 tries just to make it from Morocco into Spain. Once he finally made it into Spain on a small raft, he got thrown into a detention center for 2 months. After that, he made it to France. But even in Paris, he was homeless. He slept in parking lots, didn't have a job, didn't know anyone, and barely spoke the language. Then someone told him about a local gym. He walked in and met a coach named Fernand Lopez. Francis told him he wanted to be a boxer. Lopez looked at him and said, "Why not MMA?" At that point, Francis just needed a shot, so he said yes. The gym gave him food, a place to sleep, and gear to train. He had no idea what he was doing at first, but he learned fast. He fought his first MMA match in 2013 and won. 2 years later, he got a call from the UFC. From digging sand in Cameroon to sleeping in parking lots in Paris, Francis went through it all. Heinisch. Ian grew up in Denver, Colorado, and from a young age, life was a little chaotic. He was diagnosed with ADHD, and regular school just wasn't working for him. His parents ended up pulling him out and homeschooling him instead. To help him burn off some of that extra energy, they got him into wrestling, and that's where Ian found his thing. He took to it right away. He went on to become a high school state champion and a 2-time All-American. For a while, it really looked like he was on a solid path. After high school, he went off to college to keep wrestling, but without much structure or a clear goal, he started to lose focus. He partied more, skipped classes, and eventually dropped out. Around that same time, things at home started falling apart. His parents split up and they ended up losing the house. Just like that, Ian was broke, directionless, and full of anger. That's when things started to take a darker turn. With no purpose, he started dealing drugs. At first, it was just a way to get by, but things escalated fast. Ian got deep into the ecstasy game, moving thousands of pills at a time. He picked them up, packaged them, and drove them himself, crossing state lines with his trunk full. He was chasing fast money, but also trying to fill something missing in his life. Later on, he admitted he was using too. Eventually, the law caught up with him. He was arrested with 2,000 ecstasy pills and hit with felony drug trafficking charges. Facing serious prison time, Ian panicked. Instead of sticking around for trial, he skipped bail and fled the country. He ended up in Amsterdam, then made his way to Spain, where he sank even deeper into the criminal world. In Spain, he started smuggling cocaine from South America into Europe. He hid the drugs in hidden compartments inside suitcases and flew across borders like it was no big deal. He was staying in luxury hotels and partying non-stop. Everything was going good for him until he got caught at the airport in the Canary Islands and ended up getting sentenced to several years in a Spanish prison. That's when things finally started to shift. While in prison, Ian had time to think. He got religious, taught himself Spanish, trained every day, and even learned a local style of wrestling. Slowly, he started to remember who he really was. In 2013, after serving about 3.5 years, he was released and came back to the US, but when he landed in New York, he was picked up again on an old warrant. He spent another 9 months there and saw just how bad things could get. In his words, that was the moment he knew he had to turn his life around for real. Once he was finally free, he got clean, came back to Colorado, and threw himself fully into fighting. He started out in small regional MMA shows in 2015 and quickly climbed the ranks. He won the interim LFA middleweight title, which earned him a shot on Dana White's Contender Series in 2018. He won by knockout, and just like that, Ian Heinisch went from a fugitive drug mule to a UFC middleweight. Ken Shamrock. Ken Shamrock was born as Kenneth Wayne Kilpatrick on February 11, 1964, at an Air Force base in Georgia. His early years were already rough. Around age 5, his dad walked out, leaving his mom to raise Ken and his brothers on her own. She eventually remarried a Vietnam vet, and the family moved out to California. But even then, life didn't calm down. The new stepdad wasn't really around, so Ken and his brothers had to figure things out on their own. Money was tight, and their mom was overwhelmed trying to hold everything together. With no real structure, Ken started getting into trouble early. He was getting into fights, stealing food, skipping school, just doing whatever he had to do to survive, and when he was just 10 years old, he got stabbed in a street fight. Eventually, the state stepped in, and Ken started bouncing between foster care and group homes. By the time he was a teenager, he had already lived in multiple homes. He ran away from some and got kicked out of others. At 14, he was sent to a place called the Shamrock Ranch Boys Home in Susanville, California. That place would change everything. The home was run by a man named Bob Shamrock, who took in troubled boys and tried to steer them straight through structure, discipline, and sports. Bob saw something in Ken and introduced him to sports. Ken threw himself into wrestling and football, earning respect from his coaches for how hard he went. But a neck injury during his senior year crushed his shot at college scholarships for football. Instead of giving up, he played at a community college and even got a tryout with the Chargers, but decided to chase combat sports instead. In the early 90s, Ken moved to Japan to chase his fighting career. That's where he got into real competition with the launch of Pancreas, one of the first MMA organizations. He shocked fans by submitting big names and became one of Japan's first foreign champions. From there, he made his way to the UFC. In UFC 1, he fought Patrick Smith, then took on Royce Gracie in the first ever super fight, going nearly 40 minutes. He later beat Dan Severn at UFC 6 to become the first super fight champion. The super fight title was UFC's first version of a championship before weight classes and formal title belts existed. Ken earned a fearless reputation and the nickname the world's most dangerous man. Between UFC and Pride, he headlined over 15 fights and built his legacy as one of MMA's true pioneers. Jose Aldo. Jose Aldo was born on September 9, 1986 in a Brazilian city deep in the Amazon. Right from the start, life threw challenges at him. During a heated moment at a family party, his oldest sister, Jocelyn, picked up his crib and threw it at another sibling, without realizing Aldo was still inside. The crib landed face first on a lit barbecue, and the burns left a scar on his face that he still carries to this day. Growing up, his family was really poor. Some days there was no food on the table and going hungry became normal. His mother eventually left, and Jose was mostly raised by his father, who worked long hours as a bricklayer to take care of him and his siblings. But through it all, Aldo stayed tough. Even as a little kid, he dreamed about becoming an athlete. At first it was soccer. Like most kids in Brazil, he thought soccer might be his way out. But things shifted when he started getting into street fights. That's when he realized he liked to scrap. And more than that, he was actually good at it. Around age 13, he started training wherever he could, mostly in the streets. That eventually led him to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, where he stood out right away. A local coach saw his potential and gave him the chance to train seriously. Not long after, Aldo made a bold move. At just 17, he left his hometown and went to the city. He had almost no money, no job, and nowhere to stay. Just his gear and a dream. He slept on gym floors and trained non-stop. Eventually, he joined one of the top MMA camps in Brazil, and that's when his rise really began. He fought his way through the local scene, made a name for himself in WEC, and then became the first UFC featherweight champion, holding that title for over 5 years. Alex Pereira. Alex Pereira, born in Brazil on July 7, 1987, grew up in a rough neighborhood. School wasn't really an option. By the time he was 12, Alex was working in a tire shop, doing whatever he could to help his family get by. Around that same age, he fell into drinking and would sometimes drink a full bottle a day. At 22, desperate for change, Alex walked into a kickboxing gym to escape the addiction. That gym ended up saving his life. He fell in love with striking and showed crazy talent from the jump. He started tearing through local shows. Before long, he became a double champ in Glory Kickboxing and even beat Israel Adesanya twice. Mentally, he was in a better place. But even as a double champ, kickboxing just wasn't paying enough to take care of his family. Then one day, while watching TV, Alex saw Adesanya talking trash. He said Alex wasn't a real fighter and couldn't hang in the UFC. That lit a fire under him, so he made the jump to MMA. He started in 2015, won his first pro fight in Brazil, but took a loss early on. Still, he bounced back quickly. After a brutal first-round KO in LFA in 2020, the UFC came calling. Nobody expected him to rise that fast. In 2022, his old beef with Adesanya from their kickboxing days blew up in the media, so the UFC jumped in on the hype and set up the trilogy. He shocked the world by knocking out Adesanya to win the middleweight title. Just a year later, he moved up to light heavyweight, grabbed that belt too, and defended it 3 times in 6 months, becoming the fastest fighter ever to hold 2 belts in UFC history. Jorge Masvidal. Jorge Masvidal, born November 12, 1984 in Miami, grew up in a rough part of town. His dad got locked up when Jorge was just 4, so it was just him and his mom. She worked 2 jobs and young Jorge would crash on the couch while she stayed up grinding. When housing got tight, they had to live out of a $500 car. To help out, Jorge started throwing hands in backyard street fights for cash. Those fights were filmed and posted on the internet, and that's where he started building his name as a legit street fighter. In high school, he tried getting into wrestling, but bad grades kept him off the mat. So instead, he turned to local gyms. One place that really shaped him was Freestyle Fighting Academy. Here, he learned discipline, not just how to throw punches. By the time he was 19, he went pro. He won his debut by knockout and slowly worked his way up through the ranks, fighting in promotions like Bellator and Strikeforce. He even got a title shot in Strikeforce against Gilbert Melendez, but came up short. Still, every fight sharpened his game. Then, in 2013, he got his shot in the UFC. He got some wins and a few losses, but no matter what, Jorge always showed up ready to throw down. He picked up big wins over guys like Donald Cerrone and Darren Till, but everything changed in July 2019. That's when he landed a flying knee on Ben Askren and knocked him out cold in just 5 seconds, setting the record for the fastest knockout in UFC history. Kimbo. Kevin Ferguson, better known as Kimbo Slice, was born on February 8, 1974, in the Bahamas. As a kid, he and his 2 brothers moved with their single mom to Florida. Kevin was tough from early on. At 13, he got into his first real fight standing up for a friend in the schoolyard. That moment lit a spark in him that never really went away. In high school, he played middle linebacker and even earned a football scholarship to the University of Miami, but when Hurricane Andrew hit in 1992, it destroyed his home, and he ended up living in his old Nissan for a month. Football plans fell apart, and money problems forced him to drop out after about a year and a half. He worked all kinds of odd jobs, from bouncing at strip clubs to being a bodyguard, but in the early 2000s, he blew up online as the king of backyard street fights. These bare-knuckle brawls filmed in driveways and parking lots went viral on YouTube. In one of his early fights, he cut a guy above the eye, and from that moment on, the name Slice stuck. In 2005, Kimbo decided to take his natural power into MMA and made his pro debut in 2007. He shocked the world by submitting former heavyweight boxer Ray Mercer, then followed it up with a quick win over Tank Abbott. Not long after, he signed with Elite XC and became one of the first mainstream stars in MMA. He competed on The Ultimate Fighter in 2009, bringing record-high ratings. Then he officially debuted in UFC that same year, earning a hard win over Houston Alexander. He later switched to pro boxing from 2011 to 2013, going 7-0 with 6 knockouts before returning to MMA in Bellator and even facing Ken Shamrock in 2015. Sadly, in 2016, Kimbo passed away at 42 from heart failure. He left behind a wild underdog legacy and a son known as Baby Slice, who's been continuing his journey in combat sports. Charles Oliveira. Charles Oliveira was born on October 17, 1989, in a small beach town in Brazil. His family didn't have much, money was always tight, and they struggled just to put food on the table. When Charles was 7, things got even worse. He got hit with rheumatic fever and a heart murmur. The doctor said he might never walk again. But his mom wasn't about to give up. She and his dad started selling snacks and collecting cardboard in the streets just to pay for his treatment and give him a fighting chance. When he turned 12, a neighbor named Paulo took him to a free Brazilian jiu-jitsu class where low-income kids could train. Charles threw himself into it. Within 2 months, he won his first state tournament as a white belt. By 2004 and 2005, he was piling up medals at bigger jiu-jitsu events. All that grappling gave him confidence, and he started dreaming bigger. In 2007, at just 17, he stepped into his first MMA fight and never looked back. He tore through Brazil's regional scene with quick finishes, sometimes fighting more than once in a single night. That hustle got him a UFC debut in 2010, where he submitted Darren Elkins in just 41 seconds and started stacking submission bonuses early. But it wasn't all smooth. He hit some rough patches. There were weight issues, tough losses, and a lot of ups and downs. In 2018, he switched things up and joined a new MMA gym to sharpen his striking. That changed everything. He went from a shaky UFC record to an 11-fight win streak between 2018 and 2021. And in May 2021, he finally reached the top, knocking out Michael Chandler to become the UFC lightweight champ. Along the way, Oliveira broke more UFC records than anyone. He holds the most submission wins with 16, the most finishes with 20, and the most performance bonuses ever. And even with all that success, he never forgot where he came from. He's given back through charity work in his hometown, and in 2025, he earned the Forrest Griffin Community Award for helping kids in need. Matt Brown. Matt Brown was born January 10, 1981, in the small town of Jamestown, Ohio. On paper, his childhood looked pretty normal. He was homeschooled, but things got messy fast. The town didn't offer much, and the best you could hope for was a factory job. Matt got restless. He fell into partying hard, struggled with alcohol and meth. By his early 20s, he nearly died from a heroin overdose. He was clinically dead for almost 2 minutes, the doctor even called it, but somehow he was brought back. After that, his friends started calling him the Immortal. Soon his life spiraled, he ended up homeless, got into fights at parties, and spent time in jail. But one night, hungover at a friend's house, he impulsively signed up for an MMA match. He bought a mouthguard, boiled it in hot water in a restaurant sink to mold it to his teeth, and somehow won his first fight with zero training. That awkward win sparked something. A few hours later, he stepped into another fight and got whipped, but he still knew he wanted to train. He found a jiu-jitsu gym and started training like a madman. He went pro in 2005, built his record on small shows, and in 2007 scored a big regional win. Things finally shifted when he landed a spot on The Ultimate Fighter Season 7 in 2008. He knocked out Josh Hall to get in, then head-kicked Jeremy May in the show. He ended up losing in the quarterfinals, but the UFC signed him anyway. Once he got to the UFC, he lived up to the hype. Fans loved his tough back-and-forth fights, like the wild comeback against Eric Silva in 2014, where he got dropped early, but somehow turned it around and knocked Silva out in the 3rd round. He earned a bunch of KO of the night and fight of the night bonuses, and finished with 13 knockouts in the UFC, making him one of the top knockout artists in welterweight history. Court McGee. Court McGee was born on December 12, 1984 in Oregon. As a kid, he was a solid wrestler, placing top 5 in his high school division. He also trained in karate and boxing, always keeping his hands busy. For a while, everything seemed to be on track. After high school, he got into Weber State University, but the school didn't have a wrestling team. Without the sport to keep him focused, he started hanging out with old friends and slipping back into the party scene. Things got even worse after a car crash left him with a broken clavicle. Doctors prescribed pain pills, but instead of helping, they opened the door to something darker. He started mixing pills with alcohol, Xanax, muscle relaxers, cocaine, and heroin. One day he took too much and overdosed. He was clinically dead for 8 minutes. When he woke up in the hospital, he had to relearn how to walk and talk. But Court didn't give up. He went to rehab and got clean. He started coaching wrestling at his old high school and found a new sense of purpose. That structure helped him rebuild and eventually led him to MMA. He made his pro debut in 2007 and went 10-1. His big break came in 2010 on The Ultimate Fighter Season 11. He fought through a tough bracket and submitted Chris McRae in the finale with a rear naked choke. That win earned him a UFC contract and a submission of the night bonus. Court's path stayed challenging. He's dealt with injuries, long layoffs, and even moments where the urge to relapse crept in. As recently as 2024, after a win at UFC 307, he broke down in the octagon and said, "My biggest accomplishment is I didn't drink or use today, not the big win." Thanks for watching.